Have you ever wondered what it truly felt like to be there, in the heart of the Great War? Not just the dates and the battles we learn in school, but the raw human experience. We often see World War I in black and white, a distant, grainy chapter of history. But the emotions, the hopes, the fears, they were as vivid and real as anything we feel today. This was a world of color, of life, torn apart by a conflict that would forever change the face of our planet. It was a war fought not by faceless soldiers, but by sons, brothers, and fathers. Today, we're not just going to talk about history. We're going to try and feel it. We're going to peel back the layers of time and look into the eyes of those who lived, fought, and fell in the war to end all wars. It all started with a spark in the summer of 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated in Sarajevo, a single political act, yet it was the match that lit a continent-wide powder keg. A complex web of alliances, ambitions, and national pride, simmering for decades, finally boiled over. Within weeks, the great powers of Europe were mobilizing their armies. Imagine the atmosphere in the cities: Paris, London, Berlin, Vienna. Crowds cheered, flags waved, and young men rushed to enlist, swept up in a wave of patriotism. They were promised adventure, glory, and a quick victory. "You'll be home by Christmas," the posters declared. No one could have predicted the 4 long years of unimaginable hardship that lay ahead. The world of 1914, a world of elegant empires and seemingly endless progress, was about to vanish forever, swallowed by the mud and fire of the trenches. The initial, fast-moving battles quickly gave way to a brutal stalemate. On the Western Front, a vast network of trenches stretched from the Swiss border to the North Sea. This became the defining image of the war. Life in these trenches was a waking nightmare. Soldiers lived in a landscape of mud, barbed wire, and constant dread. The ground was churned into a liquid mess by relentless artillery fire, a sludge that could swallow men whole. Rain was a constant enemy, filling the trenches with cold, dirty water, leading to the agonizing condition known as trench foot. The stench was overwhelming, a mix of mud, stagnant water, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present smell of death. And then there were the rats, grown fat on the battlefield's grim leftovers, and the lice that infested every soldier's clothing, causing unbearable itching and trench fever. Days were spent in a state of tense boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. The constant threat was the artillery shell. Its scream as it fell from the sky was the soundtrack of the trenches. An enemy sniper's bullet could find you at any moment. And then there was the order that every soldier feared: over the top. At the sound of a whistle, they would have to climb out of the relative safety of the trench and advance across no man's land, the shattered, crater-pocked strip of ground between the opposing lines. Here, they faced a hail of machine gun fire, a weapon that could cut down hundreds of men in minutes. The courage it took to make that charge is almost beyond comprehension. It was a journey into a storm of steel, with survival depending on pure, terrifying luck. The Great War wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a horrifying laboratory for new technologies of destruction. Machine guns, as we mentioned, transformed the battlefield into a deadly killing zone. But there were other, even more sinister innovations. Poison gas was first used on a large scale at the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. Chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas were unleashed, drifting silently across no man's land. It was a cruel and indiscriminate weapon. Mustard gas was particularly feared. It caused horrific blisters on the skin, in the eyes, and in the lungs, leading to a slow, agonizing death. Gas masks became an essential, terrifying part of a soldier's kit. Imagine fumbling to put on that claustrophobic mask, your breath fogging the eyepieces, while a toxic cloud rolled towards you. The sky, once a symbol of freedom, also became a new battlefield. At the start of the war, Aircraft were flimsy contraptions used mostly for reconnaissance. But soon, pilots were dropping bombs by hand and shooting at each other with pistols. This quickly evolved into a deadly aerial ballet. Fighter planes, like the Sopwith Camel and the Fokker Dr. I, engaged in dogfights high above the trenches. These pilots, the famous aces like the Red Baron, were portrayed as modern-day knights, but their life expectancy was brutally short, and on the ground, massive artillery guns, nicknamed Big Berthas, could lob enormous shells over incredible distances, turning towns and fortifications into rubble from miles away. Technology had outpaced tactics, and the result was slaughter on an industrial scale. But amidst the horror, there were incredible stories of human spirit. The soldiers weren't just victims. They were resourceful, resilient men who found ways to endure the unendurable. They developed a dark, gallows humor to cope with the constant stress. They wrote letters and poetry, trying to capture their experiences and maintain a connection to the world they had left behind. The poems of Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon give us a painfully honest window into the soul of the common soldier. And then there was the camaraderie, the powerful bond forged between men who shared the same dangers and depended on each other for survival. Your friends in the trench were your family. They shared their last cigarette with you, they carried you when you were wounded, they mourned you when you fell. Perhaps the most famous example of this shared humanity is the Christmas Truce of 1914. Along parts of the Western Front, British and German soldiers spontaneously laid down their arms. They emerged from their trenches, met in no man's land, and exchanged gifts of food and tobacco. They sang carols together, buried their dead, and even played games of football. For one brief magical day, they saw each other not as enemies, but as fellow human beings caught in the same tragic circumstances. It was a beautiful, fleeting moment of peace in a world consumed by war, a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times our shared humanity can shine through. While the men fought on the front lines, the war effort transformed life back home. This was total war, meaning the entire nation was mobilized. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking on jobs in factories, on farms, and in transportation that had previously been reserved for men. They built the shells, the guns, and the planes that were vital to the war. These munitionettes worked long, dangerous hours, often with hazardous chemicals that could turn their skin yellow, earning them the nickname Canary Girls. Women also served as nurses near the front lines, courageously tending to the wounded in casualty clearing stations and field hospitals. Their contributions were immense, challenging traditional gender roles and paving the way for greater social change, including the right to vote in many countries after the war. The home front was a battlefield of its own, marked by rationing, propaganda, and the constant, gnawing anxiety for loved ones far away. After 4 long years, the war finally came to an end. The German Spring Offensive of 1918, a last desperate gamble, failed. With the arrival of fresh American troops and a series of successful Allied counteroffensives, the Central Powers crumbled. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the guns fell silent. The armistice was signed. Imagine the sound of that silence after years of constant, deafening noise. There were celebrations in the streets of London and Paris, a sense of overwhelming relief. But it was a victory that felt hollow for many. The world was shattered, empires had collapsed, a generation of young men was lost, and the physical and psychological scars ran deep. The war left over 16 million dead and 20 million wounded. The legacy of World War I is profound and far-reaching. It redrew the map of Europe and the Middle East, creating new countries and new conflicts. It shattered the old aristocratic order and accelerated social change. The immense psychological trauma led to the Lost Generation, a group of artists and writers disillusioned by the carnage. The harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the war, planted the seeds of resentment in Germany. ultimately contributing to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the outbreak of World War II just 2 decades later. The war to end all wars had failed in its ultimate promise. It became a haunting lesson in the catastrophic cost of nationalism, militarism, and failed diplomacy. So why do we look back? We look back not just to remember dates and battles, but to honor the human experience at the heart of it all. We remember the young men who went to war filled with patriotic pride and the seasoned veterans who returned with haunted eyes. We remember the nurses, the factory workers, the families waiting at home. By understanding their stories, their fears, and their courage, we honor their memory. And perhaps by truly grasping the immense human cost of this conflict, we can better appreciate the preciousness of peace and work harder to ensure that such a catastrophe is never repeated. The echoes of the Great War still resonate today, reminding us of the fragility of our world and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If this story moved you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.